All right, I'm going to try something a little different here. Instead of writing out a ton of documentation about this, I am going to try to walk through how to use this project template that I've been working on. There's a lot of documentation I've written about how it was supposed to work and some of the thinking behind it. But it's going to be a little cooler to see it in action. And I don't know how well this is going to work, but I figured to give it a shot here. So we're going to create a new project, and we are going to set up a database to use a recent package that I published called SQL Alchemy Postgres Point to create a geolocation database and run a query against it. So we'll see how well this works. So let's get started. Let's create a new terminal, and I'm going to create a new, let's make sure, remove the old one because I was tinkering with this, and create a new directory mapping project. And we want to cd into that directory. This little script works better when you're already in the directory. And we're going to run this command. This command is going to take this template and initialize it within this directory. So let's do that. Okay. Ask you a couple questions. It guesses a lot of the parameters as best it can. For the 1Password thing, which is going to be blurred out in this video, you can use OP account list to determine what available accounts you have if you have multiple 1Password accounts. And then similarly, you can use this OP vault list to get the vault that you actually want to plug into. So all right, got the vault ID, and it's going to go through and randomize the ports here. This makes sure that it doesn't conflict with other applications you might have running on these ports. It's going to activate the Durham project, and it's going to fail here because of the environment variable configuration, which we'll handle in a second. So, but that's okay. Okay, so we're up and running. Let's open this guy up. I'm currently using Cursor, although I wouldn't say I love Cursor more than anything else. I think it's the best one so far. It's out there in terms of AI stuff. All right, so let's fix the environment variable configuration. So the environment variable configuration here is a little tricky. You need to kind of read this through to understand it. There's basically a stack of environment variables files that are loaded. You can kind of see them here. The one that it's erroring on is the not production, which basically is the just everything but production and staging. It's meant to be like dev, test, CI, live CI, testing, all that kind of stuff. Even your build environment can pull in variables from here if it needs to. And what it's doing here is it's using 1Password to inject the secrets from your 1Password environment. The way it does this is referencing this vault ID, which we pulled earlier, in combination with these UIDs. These UIDs are what's causing the setup to fail, because it's wanting these variables here. So I think what we can do to make this simple is, obviously, if you need certain any of these keys, you're gonna have to fill them in, but I think you can just plug in nothing for those. I actually don't think we need a Sentry DSN in development. And let's actually see how far we can get just making all of these fake. Okay, and we'll know if it works if we do. What is it trying to load? Okay. So let's see. Okay, I cleaned up the documentation here a little bit because this was confusing. So I'm going to start fresh, get a new terminal. And what happens here is if you have multiple 1Password accounts tied to multiple organizations, by default, it's not going to pick one, or it's just going to pick the first one in the list that you're logged in. And you can see which one you're logged in at with 1Password Who Am I? So that can help you there. But the thing you want to do is actually create a service token. And you can do that by there's local service tokens and then GitHub service tokens. We'll handle the deployment stuff later and CI, but this is the command you want to run. This will do some fancy stuff for you if you let it, like generating the service token and then updating the service token in your local SH file. So what we're going to do is go ahead and since we have like Durenv loaded up because it succeeded because we wiped out all these secret references, then we can run the setup command and then we'll update the service tokens for CI and local access, so we don't need to worry about which 1Password account we're running under. It's also faster because it doesn't actually use the UI to authenticate you. So what we're going to do is run the setup command. The setup command does a couple things. It's in the just file here. Where is it? Where did I move it? I do not have VS Code hints. Here we go. So actually, we forgot to update this. I just refactored how the environment variable stuff is done. So now this is, instead of dev local, it's, dev local sh and dev local example. Got it right. All local. That looks good. Looks good. That looks good. Okay, cool. So this is going to set up some of these initial sort of environment variable files. And the other thing it's going to do is run these commands, which set up Python and containers and all that good stuff. So we'll see if it works. Downloading Chromium, starting up Postgres, Redis, and Mailpit, which is like a local SMTP test server thing. Migrating the database. There's a couple of kind of default migrations that are in place, which we will probably wipe out later. Failing to connect to the database. Nice. So let's see if we can fix that. So the way the database connection stuff works, if you go to mall, or M not production, you'll see how this is laid out. So it's set up to work with orb stack, which is why you see this orb stuff here. And the way orb stack works is if you go to orb.local, it'll show you everything going on that you have running locally, all these local containers. And you can point to them using these orb.local references, which is what's done here. So what's done here. So we have this Redis, Mailpit, Postgres, all that kind of stuff. And that's the paths that are used here. So if we do environment grep host, you will see these here, mapping project .localhost. I'm thinking about services host. And about my Postgres host. Here we go. Right. Database URL. Okay. So you can see orb.local. So this should work. It failed because oftentimes if we are just starting these up for the first time, it takes a second for OrbStack to do its thing, even though the Docker Docker, which is actually OrbStack, is reporting them as healthy. So one thing we could actually do to make that a little better is to add a sleep command right after the containers turn on. Really, the right thing to do here would be to like ping the hosts until they're up, but ain't nobody got time for that. Okay. Since we're running it again, the containers should be registered properly through OrbStack. No, they are migrating properly, which is interesting. Database test does not exist. So this is struggling in the migration. So let's just run database migrate. Interesting. Could not translate hostname to address. Ping's fine. And often, so there's a whole interesting rabbit hole you could go down here around using dig versus there's a Mac OS DNS query tool that I have locally. You can see this actually points to the internal IP that's used for this thing. So this should work. Let's see if it's not. There we go. So it just takes a little bit to like get going. And sometimes if you ping it or query it directly, it sort of like kickstarts the process. It's not really a great way around that, unfortunately. But okay, so we have the test database running. What we can do is use this database open command. And this will open up Table Plus, which is my favorite database workbench. And you can poke around and see these records here. So, okay, so we have that running. Next thing we're going to do is, well, let's finish the setup process. So let's just run setup again. It's safe to run this multiple times. So right. So clerk is required because the seed process requires it right here. So let's just comment out the stuff that relies on clerk for now. Okay, so it is setting up JavaScript, downloading 1 billion npm packages, classic. Yeah, let's actually do this. So the web folder contains all of the, this is fine, contains all the JavaScript stuff. So let's apply that. Okay. Now we can run the dev command and see if this whole thing works. So the dev command will start a Localia server using these randomized ports that we picked earlier. And then it will generate a proc file in the temp proc file directory, which I can show you right here. There we go. Procfile.dev, and this opens up all the processes needed to actually run the application. So let me walk through these first. because they can be confusing the first time you look at them. Oh, forget, I keep switching between cursor and VS Code, so let me try cursor. There we go. All right, so PyDev, that's Python development server. PyWorker, this is if you're using Celery, the worker. The worker process. What this watchdog thing does is restart the worker process if the Python code changes. The development server does this within the Uvicorn setup, but Celery does not do the same thing. We also have the JavaScript server. The JavaScript in this application is all in SPA, so it gets kind of bundled up and then bundled into the Python container and then served up through FastAPI. But for development, we live reload everything. And then there's this generate open API, which takes the Python API spec and generates a TypeScript library for it, which is pretty cool, but it needs to run as a separate process and kind of auto-generate. What I generally like to do here is, initially I'm not going to have a worker and a scheduler really doing anything. The other thing here is if you look at the actual proc file, you can run a scheduler within the worker, which I think is easier if you're just starting up. So you don't really need the separate scheduler process running locally. And what you can do is if we go here and go to the dev script, we can just comment out these two because we're not going to really be using them now. And it makes the development server a little faster. So let's quit out of that and then rerun it. Now the cool thing about Localius is what we're going to see here is we can view the domains that were generated for us and with a self-signed local certificate that does not throw a bunch of browser errors, which was the main goal. So let's go to the main mapping project, localhost 502. I have a feeling this auto-gened it incorrectly. Yeah, this is interesting. Okay. Why? Mapping project. Oh, yeah. Okay, so this is really what we want to use. Yep, okay. We should actually put that first in the Localius, but whatever. Okay, cannot find module client imported from blah, 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 blah. This is, we can actually make this a better first run experience, but my hunch is that the OpenAPI spec is empty. Now I wonder why it's empty. The OpenAPI spec has to generate properly. Okay, so something's failing. This is something I think I changed recently. Now, for the sake of my future self here, let us go ahead and update the Localius stuff, because really this should be first. The other thing that I did was change the name here. So instead of internal API, which was kind of odd, there's an authenticated API app, which is really what we want when we generate the internal API. Yeah, and we're just targeting the wrong one. So this is actually a good example of demonstrating the update command, which we'll try out here in a second. So this is the template. So since I'm working on a bunch of different projects, I'll kind of push things to the template. And then there's a nifty little update copier. Update from upstream template. And we'll see how well this works. Destination repository is dirty. Fair enough. Okay. Another thing we should do, I started experimenting with, yeah, this Mize VS Code. This should be disabled. Otherwise it mucks with your disable workspace. I do use it sometimes, but it'll mess with your settings area here, which is annoying. So let's just wipe those changes out. All right. Okay. And then something I will do as I continue to hack on this is pull changes into the upstream. So for instance, this we should really have upstream. So we'll just pop that in there. And I'm also gonna add my extras. So what we can do here is say just requirements extras. Oh, this actually is interesting. It doesn't include the what I want is this thing, this AI auto commit. So I hate writing commit messages and I like them tuned a particular way. So let's do that. And I need to tinker with this commit lid stuff a little bit more. So we're actually going to disable this. Get hooks. There you go. Okay. I can't remember which one it was. All right. Try it again. Nice. All right. These should all be pushed up to the template. So let's patch them, commit this. And let's stash the rest so we can go ahead and do the update. So what this does is you can look at the command exactly, but it will pull the changes from the upstream template and excludes a bunch of stuff that will create conflicts. So you'll see here, like, it broke on the localius thing, which kind of makes sense because we customize it. That really shouldn't be in here, so let's exclude that. And we will just... How do we accept current changes? That's what we want. Resolve and merge, enter, complete merge, whatever. All right. And it updates the commit SHA here, and then the other, that change that we pushed up to the template, which is kind of cool. So it's an example of how you pull the recent changes that go into that template. This is something we just added, so let's go pop that over to the template. And we'll change this. You'll notice I commit a lot. I kind of started using commits less as like atomic changes, and I make a lot of them because it's like zero cost because AI is writing the commit message. And it allows me to sort of like incrementally review all of the AI generated code that comes into my repository. So I find that doing small commits is more useful on balance because I get to make sure that all of the AI stuff is reviewed in smaller chunks. This is especially helpful when I have like parallel agents running. So that's the vibe. Okay, so you'll see the no VM thing. So let's durem allow. What kind of triggers that on the durem side is this UV layout UV. Just make sure that we're in an environment when we're using this. Okay, so let's look at what we got here. There's some more changes I want to pull into the parent repo. So that's these guys. So let's patch apply them. Same thing with this. Patch apply. And then that's it. So we can do this again. We will deal with that later. And just apply the rest of this. And yeah, let's remove the changes from that guy. Okay, back to where we were. we need to generate the OpenAPI spec. So let's search for OpenAPI. Make sure this doesn't fail. So it generated properly, and now it's generating the client for it. The client is pretty cool. It's this. If you take a look at this file, it imports these dynamically generated SDKgen, client types, all this kind of stuff. And if you dig into it, you'll see all of the routes that are in the authentication, the authenticated server route here. Application data. It passes over all the types, so you get fully typed back end to front end from FastAPI, Pydantic models up to generated TypeScript interfaces and whatnot, which is awesome. So, so let's take a look at the development server again, see if we can view this thing. All right, this is probably failing because of clerk. It wants a clerk. Let's see, entry client. Yeah. Okay. So it wants the clerk side of things, which is fair. It's kind of default setup is using clerk. If you check this out. So let's create a. Yeah, because if you look at this, this assumes that it has this clerk signed in form. And if you look at the layouts, actually kind of interesting. I think this is a bug in how it's set up. You can get your clerk, the publisher key has to clerk is invalid. You can get the publisher. Yeah, because this has to be wrapped in a clerk. Oh, right. Okay, so you have the configuration index here. This throws all these providers around the elements, and so it requires the clerk provider. So if we are going to play with an avoid setting up clerk, which I can kind of handle separately, we can just create a separate page. Call it, yeah, home is fine. And then, let's do touch web app routes home. And I'm getting on my other screen, I'm getting this request to keep authenticating against my my 1Password account. So, but we will deal with that in a second. So let's. What's happening here? Routes. Oh, I already used home. Let's see. Well, let's try unauthenticated. That makes it simple. All right. Default function. Let's just see if that works. Restart the server. Because really, I just want to get the backend side of things set up for this project. Okay, and it's still complaining about that because we have the clerk provider set up by default. So we'll just remove that from the stack. Here we are, unauthenticated. So at this point, the front end's rendering and all the back end sort of like OpenAPI to client generation stuff is working. The main thing I want to get going for this particular demo, I could do like a front end demo another time, is the model generation. So if we look at the migrations, there's a couple models that are included by default, just to kind of like show how it works and test some things out. There's this add type ID SQL helper, and then this initial commit. This is probably what you want to remove. So if we remove that, and then let's go into the models folder and clear out stuff that we don't care about. Like we probably don't care about this LLM response thing, which is really just there for testing. And we want to create a new model called location, let's say. So, and I always like just copy and pasting stuff to get a start. And let's remove this stuff. This is going to be a pretty simple model. We'll let AI help us out here. Okay, a couple things. So base model, this is from this active model project that I've been working on. This is like a different SQL model, base model. You have to read up on SQL model on your own. Timestamps mixed in is what you expect from like an ORM. It drove me nuts that SQL model, SQL alchemy, blah, 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 that they don't have basic things that we love in Rails, like updated at, created at, all this kind of stuff. So I added those in mix-in as a mix-in, so this will create a created at an update. Soft deletion mix-in is if you like to do soft deletes. I'll leave that in there. And then type ID is kind of unique. If you've used Stripe, you've noticed they have these like CHPY kind of like objects IDs. This mimics those. It's not perfect because the IDs still get stored as native UIDs in Postgres, which is important for performance purposes. But they get rendered out to the user with this prefix. So this will look something like, you know, LOC, blah, 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 blah. And it's like a base 32 encoded suffix from the UID. Okay. So we're back at it. So we're editing this location field. So let's just add a name and location. That's all we really need. Okay. Okay, so this is obviously wrong. What we're going to do here is use this new package that I whipped up. So let's add it. And then I actually can't remember how to use it, but there's some example models here, so I'm going to copy from this. This actually doesn't look exactly right. Okay, so I checked it out on the other project, and what we need here is a tuple definition. So this is actually how this gets rendered by the point type into the Pydantic object, but internally within the Postgres database, it is stored as a custom type. So that's what's going on here. So this should work. Key error, blah, 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 database migration failed. Now, this is probably because we wiped out a couple of those database migrations. So we can do database reset, which force destroys your local database. Warning. Okay, this isn't the problem. So let's see what we got. What is it? Migrations, versions. Type ID, blah, 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 down revision. This is the root revision, so there should be no down revision. I may have copy pasted this incorrectly, so a lot of this stuff has been pulled from other projects. So let's see what we got. Yeah, okay, so the dates are incorrect here, which is what makes this confusing. So let's just, if we set this to none, database reset should work. And we got to fix this. It's asking on another screen, it's asking for my 1Password login. Okay. That's confusing. Oh, it's wrapping. Come on, come on, come on. Don't wrap on me. Why is it doing an absolute path? That's kind of obnoxious. Okay, so let's take a look at it. So a couple things to note. You can see the comments flow through. And why is it saying normal admin user role? Do we still have a user role floating around? Oh, right, on the user record. That's fair. And we got the location. Yep, and then it's using a specific point type here, which is cool. So that's what we got happening. So let's run just db migrate to actually get this into the database. And it's probably going to fail because SQL Alchemy Postgres point is not defined. Oh, that's interesting. So yeah, we need to manually add it here. I wonder how you get around that so you don't need to like fail by default. Okay, cool. So now we have the location in here. However, what we don't have is the extra extensions loaded to actually run a fancy sort of like distance query and whatnot against this table. So let me pull those from the other project. Okay, I got them. Now you're gonna have to manually add these in. You need the cube and the earth distance extensions in order to run some of the built-in Postgres GIS stuff. Now there is a Postgres GIS extension, but that requires you to actually have a custom Postgres image running on your servers, which I am not as keen on, especially when this stuff works pretty well. So PostGIS is great if you have really complex needs in terms of your location stuff, but this works just fine for the normal person. Now, I've edited this migration. If I try to run db migrate, it's going to be like, hey, there's nothing to migrate because we already did. But what we can do is actually downgrade and Python and their implementations. We can just downgrade and then upgrade again. And you can see, like, if I refresh this, nothing happens. Now, since these don't exist, we're gonna have to do that. There's a handy downgrade last, which will drop us down one version. And uncomment, and then we can just do db migrate to jump up the database version. And then we should see a ton of functions pop up in here. Here they are. Okay. We are in business. Okay, let's create a couple seed entries here by generating a factory. So location factory, and let's import the location. And I wonder if Faker actually has a latitude and longitude. Now, there's a Faker instance that's added to the polyfactory stuff, so we can use that. And yeah, let's try that. And we can play with this in our console. So let's pop that open. And you'll notice, like, I have to deal with database sessions. So if you, and that sounds good. If you use the active model package, it does a lot of the session stuff for you. So it makes it easier to play with. Now in this case, you actually have to think about it. But if you build and then save, it should work. Okay. So cool. Let's get a couple of these going. Boom. Great. Now, the question is, what what lat and longitude is this close to? Let's see if, what LLM do we want to try for this? Okay, so let's see if we can figure it out. So the next thing I want to do is do a query. So let's add it to the unauthenticated routes. And we're just going to do locations, get locations. But we're going to do a query based on the input. So I wonder if we can get this to do like US geographies, please. Now, who knows if that's right? And who knows if it even works? Nope. Yeah, I didn't think so. Yeah, so this gets tricky because it's like it'd be helpful to know what zip code, what like latitude and longitude we're near, to do a search, that kind of thing. I don't know that much about latitude and longitude, to be honest. Let's see. I think this will work for the demo because we got the data. Okay, so let's do this. What we want to do is an Earth distance thing here. Now, thing you got to be careful about is the native point data type in Postgres expects it in a long, lat. GeoJSON, which is another specification, does the opposite, lat and long, and you hear lat long a lot. So I thought everything was lat long, but that's not true. You really have to pay attention to what kind of pairing different systems appreciate and how they set it up. So I'm going to hop over to the other project and grab this sample code. Okay, so I got some of it. So we want its location, target point. We want long lat, and we're going to add long lat to our input here. So say within 10 miles. Now, I am no geolocation expert, so I can't even really tell you exactly how this works or how well it works, but it seems to work pretty well. Okay, you're going to get a typing error on all the SQL model stuff because SQL model is still in development, and it honestly needs some work, it needs some love, but this will at least give us an idea. Now, for a database query like this, what we can do is use this helper where, and we can just do, or select. So we can do select, and then this is a filter. We'll add it like this, and then we'll do an all. And all gives us a generator, and we can just include that result, and it'll get rendered out to a list for us if we include it here. And that should work for us. And let's see, lat long. I can't remember if do we need to mark these as a query for query string? Let's see what the LLM says. Fair enough. Let's do that. Okay, so this should work. So let's go back to our other little, where are we? What do we call it? Unauthenticated TSX, and add a lat long input, add a submit button. Not bad. Okay, and let's just make sure this works. Okay, cool. So, what we can do here is Okay, right. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our client. Now this magical file here will import all of our types, but these magical SDK gens. And this should have our, it doesn't have our thing. Where is it? Unauthenticated. Ah, right, because we're actually generating against the wrong routes. So you can generate against everything if you want in the OpenAPI generation stuff, which we can find. OpenAPI. JavaScript, it's on the JavaScript side. If we remove this completely, it will generate a OpenAPI spec for everything. Which is the easiest way to go. You could technically have different clients for different part of the application, that kind of thing. But this will give us an idea. Let's just like sanity check. Actually, we're going to use this little tool here. Login as, one. There we go. Unauthenticated / locations. Cool. So you can see here all the types come through. And if we run dev here, what we can do is if we make this async and say data error, somehow it knows. It's amazing. And it even knows where to import it from. Boom, boom, boom. This is why I like types. Lat long is not string is not a sendable number, so it even knows it should have a number. Cool. Now, why is it complaining? Ah, right. Okay. Let's just bring up here. Let's see what we got. 10, 10. Now, nothing's going to show up because that's not close to anything that we have. This is where it's going to get a little tricky. So let's say, now remember, it's long. Lat. Fair enough, that isn't a number. Okay, so this is coming through okay, which is cool. And you'll see the location ID is the LOC sort of like type ID thing. But if you look over here, these are normal UIDs. And if you use raycast, you can type ID parse, and it pulls that ID, and you can see it pull out the base 32 encoding. There's also helpers in the functions table to do that as well. So it gives user-friendly IDs, which I think are important, although it's a little clunky to translate back and forth. The cool thing is I added some helpers to the active model side of things. So you can go over here, and if you hop in an IPython terminal and do location get, it'll figure it out and know that this is a type ID and parse it and convert it to UID and then run the query. So, okay, why isn't this working? Locations. So this should have the type exactly of what's coming out of here, but it doesn't, which is odd. So if we go to unauthenticated, unauthenticated PY, The reason is because this doesn't have a type specified. So let's do that. And this should be happy. Generator locations. This actually wants the list. Fair enough. Okay. So this should regenerate the types. And now we can see, perfect. It's the right thing. So now we can set up an invariant, which will type filter or type scope. What do you call it? Type refine the types. And now we have a list of, hey, these are the location objects. Nice. So this should actually pop up now. Let's try to, this was long. And I think this was latitude. Nope, got them backwards. Or it's broken, either one. There we go. And it rendered them, perfect. Now, I don't know how we make these like a mile off or something, because it's not doing an exact search, right? It's sort of like running, so it's still working, even though it's not an exact match. So it's doing the Earth distance thing. So that's how this works, and you can kind of tie it into the UI. The thing that's cool here is like the types flow all the way through, so it makes it really nice to work on the front end side. And that's cool, and you don't need to like worry about remembering to generate that stuff. That's all handled by this dev stuff, the dev script, just dev. Yeah, hopefully this is a good demo of sort of how the framework and template works. There's a lot of pieces. It's not like the most intuitive, but it's sort of a trade-off of, I hate JavaScript, and you can kind of use JavaScript just as a functional renderer on the front end and take advantage of all the libraries and stuff that exist, which are awesome. But use Python, which is at least has built-in gradual typing compared to Ruby, and has a lot of kind of community support, and isn't compiled and stuff like that, which, I kind of prefer that to Rust or Go for that reason, as much as I like those languages. So I don't know. It seems like the best of all worlds, although I wish it was simpler. But hopefully this is useful.